Hi, this is Professor Arujo with your introduction to Module 4. Again, the most important thing is to make sure you're doing that module to-do list. It's extremely important. Module 4 covers insurance. It's a very, very important topic in financial planning because it helps us reduce risk. Okay. In this particular module, we're going to be reversing the order of the chapters. The chapters in the book that cover insurance are 8, 9, and 10. But the most important one to start with is chapter 10 because that affects most people from college age all the way up, and that's property insurance, home and auto. So specifically, auto would usually affect everybody in college, and some folks in college actually rent or own their homes, and so home protection is also very important. So we start with chapter 10, which is auto and home insurance. We'll then move on to chapter 9, which is healthcare and disability insurance. We're only going to be touching up on basic concepts in chapter 9 because the entire system for healthcare in this country is extremely complex and extremely screwed up. And so you'll learn a little bit about it, but we're not going to go into too much detail. They could be whole courses on this topic. That's how important and detailed it is. And lastly, we'll look at chapter 8, which is on life insurance. And that's a very, very important factor as well. And it's a little different than what people think. Life insurance is really about covering unexpected death. People that are relying on you to live, usually because you are a earner of income in your home, and without you there, they would suffer greatly. So life insurance is really to protect that risk. So the first thing you need to do also in this module that's different is step 1. Step 1 is a video-only lesson. So the first thing you do is really get a very good understanding of what risk is, because that's the entire purpose of understanding insurance. Insurance is really about how do we cover risk. And we take risks, we have risks every day, and we have many, many choices on how to deal with those risks. But perhaps the best choice that we could make in financial planning is to make sure we are covering certain risks with insurance. So the concept of risk is really important. And then before you start reading into anything, I need you to do this discussion board question. It's basically insurance for college students. It's a very, very good video. It covers all different types of areas that a lot of folks don't really know about. Some people do. But I need you to do that discussion question with that video before you actually start into everything else. Okay? Once you finish step 1, the first thing we're going to be doing is looking at chapter 10, okay, which is about property insurance and liability insurance. So very important concepts. Notice that here in this module, there's a lot of video links because there's a lot of information that you probably might not be able to get the real gist of by reading it in the book. So these particular video links are connected to important insurance and other groups that basically explain briefly what some of these issues are. And so I hope that you go through each of those particular videos as you're reading the lessons in each chapter. So again, there's several videos right away in chapter 10, objective 1. Objective 2 and 3 covers homeowners policies and what is protected. So there's a few things that you need to know about that. A very good video on renters insurance, because you don't have to be a homeowner to need insurance. If you are renting a place and something bad happens in your apartment, guess who's responsible for that? You are. You are liable for everything that happens in your property, whether that be in your apartment, in your house, or in your car, as you'll see. So very important to understand these types of concepts. Objective 4 in chapter 10 goes over the parts of auto policies. And this is very important because I'm going to be asking you in the first activity to analyze your auto policy and compare with two things. One, the state requirements in New York. Unless you don't live in New York, then whatever your state requirements are. Secondly, compare the policy that you have with either the ones that are covered in the video called Car Insurance 101, or there's another link I've provided of what the average person in New York has covered. So I need you to compare and understand that, because whatever coverage you decided not to have, you may be assuming that risk without knowing about it. And insurance, especially car insurance as well, is not just about what you see on the commercials of getting, low prices for coverage. It's really about sensible coverage. The risks that you take when you drive a car are great. You could hit someone with your car and hurt somebody, accidentally, of course. And there's a lot of risk in that, because you would be responsible for the injuries to their person, which include medical and job loss, legal expenses, other types of things that they would have. Yeah, if you cause that and you're the cause of the damage, you're liable for all of that type of stuff. Of course, you have to cover property damage. You have to cover medical payments. And of course, you might yourself get hit or in an accident with someone who doesn't have any insurance or has the bare minimum insurance. What then? Well, you can't get blood from a stone, they say. So you have to make sure that that you're not taking on excessive risk by just assuming that everyone who drives has good coverage, because they don't. And you're going to be stuck holding the bill if anything bad happens to you, if you're in an accident or a situation with someone who doesn't have insurance or has very bare minimum insurance that doesn't cover the cost of the loss that you've incurred in an accident. So these are very, very important concepts that you really must know. And that's why there's a special emphasis on chapter 10 in more detail in this particular module. So make sure you understand that. And I am going to ask you to look at your auto policy, or if you're covered under your parents' policy, a copy of their policy, so you know what the risks are. Maybe your parents might know, they might not know. It might be a nice time for a nice family discussion on these types of risks. I find it to be very educational for everyone in the family to get to know a little bit more about their auto policy. So this is super important to understand. There's a couple of discussion board questions, particularly for chapter 10. One is about liability and negligence. And that's important because whether you realize it or not, and they don't really teach this in school, right? But as soon as you turn 18, as soon as you start owning any type of property, having a car or whatnot, all types of legal responsibilities fall on you. And that's what liability is really about. And if you do something by mistake, of course, non-intentional, guess what? You're still liable. You still have to pay. That's negligence. And understanding these legal concepts and how they apply to you as an adult is extremely important. And so I'm going to ask a question here about how it affects you. The concept of liability, the concept of negligence. You're going to read that and respond. Another one here is, how are you protecting yourself against uninsured drivers? They're out there. Just because, and let me give you a quick example, just because someone loses their license because they were driving drunk, or they have several infractions and they lost their license, doesn't stop them from getting behind a wheel of a car and driving. They might need to get to work and they have no other way to do it. So they take a risk and get behind the car wheel and start driving, even though they don't have a license, they don't have insurance, they don't have anything. these things happen in life. This is the reality of where we live and our time here. So just because someone is stripped of a right to drive or other types of things doesn't mean they're not going out there and driving, particularly if they know how. If they cause an accident with you, of course, that's the most important risk to understand. If they don't have any insurance, you're stuck holding the bill, okay? Don't get into that particular situation. And that's why it's important to understand about uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage on your car insurance policy, because they are out there. And God forbid, you all know what a bad day is. Nothing is going to get any worse unless if you get hit by someone who has absolutely no coverage, and you have all these problems, a wrecked car, maybe an injury. Guess what? You're going to have to pay for it, because there's no way that they can be held financially responsible. They can be held responsible, but how can they pay you if they don't have any insurance coverage to cover that type of loss? So this is the important issue of the day. Chapter 10 is going to be extremely more detail oriented in our coverage than the other two. There's insurance for almost everything out there, you can probably imagine. But I think on a practical scale, in a short class in college, the most important thing I wanted to emphasize was property and liability, because mostly everyone I know in college drives, and there's many, many more folks who have an apartment or even have a house, older students that have purchased a house. These are very, very important issues to understand. Then we move into chapter 9. Again, I think you should look at the economics of healthcare. It's a very important video to watch to see, how things have developed over time, understanding healthcare insurance costs, understanding the differences in our insurance plans. Because remember, the only way you get insurance is, by most Americans, through their employer. Health insurance is not something that you can go out and purchase like car insurance. It's way too expensive for everyone to do that. So Americans in general get their insurance, healthcare coverage through their employer. There are exceptions. There are government healthcare programs that are out there. If you're 65 and older, it's Medicare. Okay, everybody gets Medicare. Everyone qualifies for Medicare. In essence, it's that universal healthcare coverage, but you have to be 65 or older to be in that group of universal healthcare coverage. And then, of course, there is Medicaid, which is state-run insurance for the poor. Again, it's a government-run program, but it's funded by taxes. And it's just insurance, okay? It's just insurance. It's not, as some folks worry about, it's not government-controlled healthcare. It's not. It's just simply insurance. It's insurance. The hospitals are private. The doctors are private. The drug companies are private. The medical equipment companies are private. Everything in the healthcare industry is private. They're basically corporations. Okay, your doctor is for profit. He looks at you, she looks at you with dollar signs, because that's exactly how they make money. That's the business of a doctor's office. I'm sorry to break the news, but this is the system that we have. Okay, the only government-run healthcare, by the way, is the Veterans Administration. So if you're a veteran and you go to the VA, you're in a government healthcare system, because then the government does own the hospitals in the VA system. The government does pay the doctors and nurses in the VA system. That's government healthcare. We don't have that overwhelmingly unless you're a veteran, okay? And most people in the country are not veterans. And so we are stuck with a private system of healthcare, which we rely on our employers or the government for insurance to gain access to that. So it's important so you have to understand a little bit of healthcare and some of those particular insurances. That's a very important thing. There's a history of healthcare that I put up here as well. That might be very helpful to you to understand. Years and years ago, doctors used to make house calls and just take whatever you could offer them for payment. We've come a long way since those days, and so it's sort of an interesting type of little history to understand. This just didn't start that way. There is a discussion board question on a national healthcare insurance crisis. It's a very important question that I think is worth listening to your opinion on after you read the article. Lastly, in Chapter 9, disability. Disability income really is about it protects against the risk that you cannot work because you're hurt. That might be you hurt your back, maybe because of a car accident, maybe because you thought you were Hercules and wanted to lift something, and life has not taught you these lessons yet, and so you have to learn the hard way. And then you hurt your back. Or it could be very simple carpal tunnel syndrome. We are stuck in keyboards all day at work, sitting down. We're getting these really bad injuries that stop us from working. Well, if you can't work, you can't earn income. If you can't earn income, you can't live in this country because everything is income-based. You have to go out and make a living. So the risk is loss of income. That's what disability insurance covers. So there are lots of statistics on this that a lot of people don't know about. I'm having you read about that, and there's a discussion board question. And Chapter 9 ends with a quiz. This is a long introduction, huh? Okay, and the last thing, Chapter 8, is about life insurance. Very important type of thing to understand, as I mentioned. The most common policies that we deal with are term life and whole life. There is a hybrid called variable life or universal life. There's a whole bunch of other types of things, but I think basically the two policies that you need to become familiar with are either a term life insurance policy or a whole life insurance policy. Those are very, very important. And then, of course, you have to be careful. The discussion board question brings up a very important issue. Are you worth more dead than alive? And I think that's a very interesting question when it comes to life insurance, because some people pack on the life insurance. Well, life insurance is supposed to cover those that are depending on your life if your life was taken. So I would probably need a ton of life insurance if I was, say, a father of 3 in my 40s with a mortgage and all this other stuff. And if I died, all of that would really impact my family. So the risk is premature death in my 40s would mean that my spouse and children may not be able to maintain the life that I've helped build with them, and the life insurance covers that risk. Okay, well, you're probably not worth more dead than alive then. However, do you still need that much insurance when you're 70? You're retired, you're not working anymore, assuming your house is paid for, you have no other debts. Do you really need life insurance? You really need to be worth $1 million at 70 when you don't have anyone relying on you. Your kids have left the house, there's no one depending on your income. In that situation, you might be worth more dead than alive. And so very important to sort of understand that we don't want to set up any perverse incentives for relatives as we age. And one of them is having too much life insurance. And I don't mean to be giggling. I just find humor in a lot of things. But that's one of those types of things. So I want you to check that out as well. It's a very interesting concept that I think you'll enjoy. And then, of course, there's a Chapter 8 quiz, and of course, the module exam. Okay, and that basically is the Module 4 in a nutshell.